All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Absurd Podcast number 3. Even though last podcast was an interview about the coronavirus, this one is more of a podcast of sorts. And as a guest today, I have Bill Joslin. Hello, Bill.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. I mean, we had quite a lot of conversations over Discord for the last 2 weeks, more than we ever
Yeah,
had.
brilliant.
So it's quite amazing.
Yeah,
The only
it
time I
is.
really spoke to you previously was like on Ray's podcast and then maybe a few other times, but not as much as we
Yeah, a
usually do
few.
now.
Yeah, and it's been really great. I'm really glad to make that transition because it's got the juices flowing again for me.
Awesome. So, what do you mean with juices? Like, were you not active before?
Well, no, it's like a lot of what I got off the Facebook community was out of the dialogue. It would spark more, and not just ideas, exchanging ideas. It would spark lines of thought, right? So that might either be out of what's conflicts that are coming up, or somebody will plant a seed, and that all kind of took a nosedive about a year ago. Um, so when we jumped back on Discord, uh, and I don't know if it's necessarily related to the conversations we're having, all of these ideas started falling into place, like little ideas that have come across in the last year or so. So it's like, it's fulfilling the needs that were lost in the community before for me.
So, what are these new ideas that pops up in your head then? What are you working on?
There's two lines that I'm working on right now. One is looking at operationalism, the criteria of operationalism, uh, from the standpoint of projections rather than a linear progress or a checklist.
Yeah?
So that's looking at the relationship between each criteria and how it's vetting each other. So from that, it's I think what we can do is we can create an easier to digest, almost like paragraph outline for making an argument. So that's one side, and that was tying into geometry and brain chemistry and
Yeah?
and logic and everything else. The other one was the Boyds algorithm that I posted a little bit on Discord. And Boyd's algorithm is the sort of the math that governs flocking behavior. And that has greatly helped me to greatly disambiguate or deconflate different operations within group dynamics. So I'm just at the point now. I've got enough citations to say, okay, this is something going on that's real, and about to dive into what the actual biology is. If the human biology around things like social signaling or status signaling. So the endocrinology does line up with, say, fish in how they orient themselves in a school, or birds flocking, or what have you. So essentially, that's just to say that human societies or markets are murmurations or emergent behavior when these three functional components are, I wouldn't say they're imbalanced, but when they're within parameters enough that allow for this flourishing of emergent behavior. In other words, classical liberals got it right. They let us murmur. They let us create this flocking behavior, which created prosperity.
So, flocking behavior as in conversations and free speech? What do you mean with that?
Okay, so the three functional components in Boyd's algorithm, and I'm going to alter the terms a little bit as we go on, but the terms that they use is alignment, cohesion, and separation.
Yeah?
And it's very simple. So the idea behind it is that you have simple rules for local or interactions. Uh, so you have alignment where the flock's going in the same direction. You have cohesion, which is birds coming together into a group. And then you have separation, which is collision detection. So it's along the lines of fly where everybody else is going, try to get as close to everybody else as you can, but don't run into anybody.
Hmm.
And when every node in that crowd, in that population, is calculating based off of that, which means when one member adjusts its direction, the rest all have to update around it, which then forces an update on single node. So it's a non-linear,
Yeah.
recursive, iterative interaction. So it's a deviation away from sort of mechanistic thinking that A plus B equals D. It's not. It all runs interdependently. So I look at alignment in terms of that term is fine. That's in human systems. That would be things like shared goals, common ground, or identity. I would change cohesion to clustering behavior. The math behind cohesion is if there's an immediate group around you, try to get to the center of that group. So everybody's fighting to be at the center of the group, get to the center of the group. And then separation, collision detection in human systems, I would say, is things like conflict avoidance or remuneration. So law,
Yeah.
conflict resolution. So you have an attractive force, which is the clustering. You have a risk, which is avoid conflict or deal with conflict, and that causes an elastic behavior. And then you have alignment that keeps everybody going in the same direction. So when I break that down into whether it's societal institutions or even individual behavior, you have things like celebrities is a clustering effect. It draws people in.
Yes.
Hierarchies, status signaling or status competition or sexual market competition is a clustering.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So everybody's trying to get to the center of the cluster. So it helps to think of hierarchies not like a pyramid, but like a cluster, and the top of the pyramid is actually the center of the cluster. Then if you look at alignment, it would be things like social signaling, virtue signaling, sanity signaling, where if you're deviating a little too far away from where everybody else is going, you get this rebuke, you get ostracized, or there's some sort of signal back to say, okay, you're deviating too far, get back in line with the rest of us.
So I'm thinking, in other words, you're saying like the storks with the V formation flying out. The one in the
Right.
in the front is either the institution or the elite creating the overall structure, but it ain't the structure itself because no one is fully controlling. But it's much more of a clustering. It's just you're supposed to follow that one, and then the rest is.
I'm going to correct you. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I don't see the leader of that as creating a structure for following. It's just simply the result of the clustering behavior.
It's okay.
Yeah, and so this is where it helped me disambiguate that there's a difference with leadership. There's a difference between clustering and alignment, and alignment itself, I don't think is necessarily institutional. It's things like shared identity or past ethnicity or growing up within a social context that sets alignment.
Yes.
And then with the clustering behavior, you have people that can then rise. So the difference between, say, a thought leader or I can't remember the name for it, people that are affecting culture, and a celebrity is that these other people are able to have a clustering effect around them, but also set the alignment. Where clustering alone is it actually comes at the stake of alignment. So if you took a Boyds Algorithm model and you messed with the parameters on those three things, if you ramp up cohesion, so when everybody's going on about social decay and social erosion, their complaint is a cohesion complaint as they're arguing, but it's actually an alignment issue. That if you ramp up cohesion, what you get is over the full population, you get everybody centering into groups, and then those groups stop interacting. So the flocking behavior stops. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the political landscape right now, where people are getting further and further divided, more and more into their own groups. Nobody's communicating to each other. Or like in American politics, the split between right and left is getting more and more bifurcated. So it's not that we're suffering from social erosion as a cohesion problem, it's an alignment problem. If you ramp up alignment above separation and collision, you get in a line. Everybody falls in line, and that also breaks that flocking behavior again. And then with separation, all the nodes dissipate, and you get an equal distribution of all the nodes throughout the space, and none of them interact. That would be atomization. So we need to have all of these sort of things in place, like law, culture can set alignment, sovereignty itself. You could think of sovereignty clearing a territory of competitors, and then instituting law aligns human behavior towards cooperation. It's an alignment function. That if then with law, which law would be on one hand that alignment issue, it's also about this collision detection, how to prevent the collisions or how to remediate them. So in other words, don't run into the people beside you. Well, this is where we get into individual rights and autonomy, that without addressing law on the local level and without having some value on the individual compared to the collective, then that collision detection doesn't occur. So individuality is important, but too much of it's atomization. And then your cohesion within that would be the striving that we have, whether it's to celebrity or to do better in our job or whatever, that keeps all of this moving. So if the parameters are set just right, you get flocking behavior. If you're ramping up one over the other or trying to correct one with the other, it collapses.
And how does religion apply in this algorithm?
I would say religion is the alignment function, and maybe that's the issue that we have. Is it's a very robust alignment function because it's applicable at the local scale, at the scale of the individual, and all of this that I'm talking about is about controlling incentive structures on the local level. So incentive structures of individuals. The religion operates on that individual level, but it also provided institutions and common language, common frames across all of these other scales. So it was excellent at creating an alignment. But I think that historically, the institution of the church was also where all of these other institutions were thrown in. So there was an obscurity around these other two functions that through the Enlightenment, they were actually segregated out. So you get rule of law and then the emergence of individual rights. And then you get governance separated from the state, which which is a breakaway from the old familial lines, which allowed a cohesive function to happen. And then we start getting this flocking behavior, and the end result was this dramatic prosperity.
So I'm thinking not so much in the West, but in Iraq with religious or political polarization. But an example, I guess, of this, and a failure as well in this, is the Iranian Revolution. But before the Iranian Revolution, so you have seen pictures of Iran previously, before the revolution, where everyone was dressed very Western, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was created by the king and the institutions by the king to kind of like, they started dressing Western, and then the upper middle class, the middle class started to mimic that, and then politics also started to mimic that. But what they failed to do was to get the lower class to follow that system. The lower class started following the Islamic system mostly, which was hidden quite a lot, because no one saw the Islamic Revolution happen really, because it was hidden in the lower classes. But once the break of the revolution and the lower classes, the culture of the lower class went up to the upper classes, because it was religious people who became the new upper class. The middle class mimicked that once more with the Islamic gowns, for example, putting on the burqa and niqab. It was forced upon in one way, but it was also starting to mimic because the upper class also weared it. So the middle class started to mimic that type of behavior. So in one way, I'm guessing this is the type of clustering you're talking about. So it's not a direct, not someone directly changing structure, but just smaller patterns creating cohesions because people want to be as the social structure is, and then just
Yeah.
through that, just changing and clustering as you go. Yeah, they're going in
And
together.
I think that sorry, go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead. You think?
That I think that our institutions, our religions, our institutions, anything that we're thinking about are reflections of this biology. And when we start comparing civilizational systems, we might be able to look at them side by side based on these three parameters or these three functions. And then within them, there's a ton of parameters that we can get a clearer view to say, okay, in this particular case, the lower classes um, weren't responding
Yep.
to the incentives around cohesion, and what they were seeking was greater alignment. So they turned to a stronger religion, right? And then that in itself could be a matter of predilection or IQ distribution. So if moving up a social ladder or isn't available to you, you're not going to respond to incentives around clustering,
Huh.
like fashion or wealth, seeking wealth, and that sort of thing. So how do you compensate for the lack of cohesion? You lean on alignment, which is then a different kind of clustering. So if you think of like monotheistic religions as the attempt to merge cohesion and alignment so that there's only one cluster and everybody's moving in the same direction. And that's not flocking behavior. And then the flocking behavior becomes important because it is constantly updated and constantly negotiated and calculated. So that's what gives it adaptability. So if you don't have that flocking behavior, you lose adaptability to changes. Yeah, so I would say that this, it's still a new idea, but I think this might actually give us on one hand maybe an analogy to look at these things to measure them more clearly.
Yeah.
And once I dived into the analogy, I was like, oh, this might actually be real in the sense that this is our biology, that anything that we're talking about around social interactions, there's a biological basis that seems to fall into these functions. So one of the examples of that would be near breeding. If you look at human biodiversity and the idea that near breeding was critical for not only genetic health but also cultural velocity, there's two olfactory functions at play. If you're seeking a mate and their immune system is too similar to your own, you smell them as repulsive.
Huh.
So smell is moderating this uh, potential weakness in offspring from immunity. But on the same notion, the overall VOCs, the volatile organic compounds that we emit in our smell from the rest of our diet, not necessarily our immunity, if they're too dissimilar, we find that as repulsive.
Huh.
So then what happens is that there's a broader parameter of genetic similarity that has a VOC emission that is similar enough that it brings people together around that. And then there's this smaller scale one around immunity to make sure you're not inbreeding. Well, that becomes that clustering and that separation functions again that causes an elastic effect. It's like not too close, not too far. And the result is then near breeding. And then cultural and genetic robustness because of that.
But I'm thinking then, if we talk about breeding, there's still a change between how men and women choose to breed. Women usually choose more closer to themselves, a tribal, while they have, whatever culture wants you to go out and have many sexual partners. But the ones they choose to have a baby with is usually in their own tribe, as we've seen statistics on, while men go out and usually have more, what's called interracial relationships.
Right, and then that would tie into the different effects of oxytocin, and then with men in testosterone, that men are not as oriented to the in-group. And you can even draw that further out into like what Dutton's talking about with the genius strategy. The Europeans tend to be a little bit less out-group, so we don't have the same attractive force in our mate selection because we've kind of flirted with maybe producing some bad genetics every now and then in mutation load, because we can scrape the benefits of producing geniuses. So we'll align on, say, shared values rather than shared ethnic or biology. But that when I'm saying that similar VOC emission, it's although you can find patterns across different races. That doesn't mean that you won't have a person in Asia and a person from Europe that have a compatible enough VOC emission and dissimilar enough immune system that they wouldn't find each other attractive. So now we're talking about the flocking behavior clusters, where now clusters are adjusting and updating based on the same algorithm. So a whole new scale of Boyds algorithm.
But I mean, during colonization, hasn't every man pretty much, like every European has been, like Europeans have been with every type of woman in every type of group. So the question is then, is there any group that would be too out there? Because I'm thinking, even the Aborigines, which are the furthest one from the Europeans, have relationship with Europeans one way or another. So there isn't any group that is too far off. Maybe we can see differences. Maybe you don't find them more attractive, but there's still enough there, similarities, to have some sort of attraction to each other.
Yeah, well, and there's other factors at play. So I don't want to paint it like there's only one or two factors at play. Men's mating strategy is to mate down and across or down, and to mate often and as much as possible. So men's mating drives would overlook some of that. It's just a matter of getting your genes out as much as possible before you get killed. Where females, that's a little bit different. It's mate up and across, at the very minimum across, but mate up.
Yeah.
So being more discerning on these biological factors, and then you can look at where you have these different tendencies overlap. So men's mating strategy is mate early, often, frequently, and across and down, but then their acquisitional strategy is to preserve, like to acquire, continuously acquire and conserve. Well, if you mix those two things together and that becomes the dominant social value, then you get things like cousin marriage, where you get polygamy, and then you have marriages within the family to try to keep the property within the family, because you have a collision of these two strategies that aren't offset by the female strategies. So now we're talking about parameters coming out of balance again, and the flocking behavior declines. And then the result is reduced genetic quality and reduced social stability.
And this was it was the men doing this, choosing to do polygamy, or was it the woman?
Well, polygamy, well, no, because I think polygamy to a large extent has to be enforced to some degree. Better established males have to at some point exert either a cultural influence or a strict coercive influence to eliminate competitors. So you see this in sort of some of the more sketchier Mormon communities, where the older men that are sort of their elders,
yes,
will start kicking the young males out, banishing them from the community. And they're not banishing them out of bad behavior. They're banishing them out because they're potential competitors for these wives.
Yeah,
they don't want too many men in their community, and they don't want anybody that's going to compete with them. So, yeah, and then just in terms of biology, polygamy is sort of the ideal male-driven mate strategy. That the top male, because he's mating across and down, the top male is the only one that breeds. So his mate selection is distributing better quality genes through the rest of the population. Well, males across the spectrum all have that same strategy. And if you have a male in the middle, he's taking his genetic pool and he's
And
reducing the quality of it.
and this is what we
And then the lower
saw.
one, the same thing.
This is what we saw during feudalism, for example, where the normal classes had about the only a replacement rate. So they had, well, they usually had 6 or 7, but most of them died. 2 of them usually survived. And then they just replaced the job of the parents. So it became a self-reliant system. The only one who bred and children survived are the monarchs. So, and the elite aristocracy. And they then replaced the genetic distribution throughout Europe. This is why everybody said, oh, well, the myth that everybody's from, like, has a relation with Charlemagne, it's comes from that everybody has kind of been replaced by the aristocracy one way or another through the feudal system.
And that also goes back into the resource acquisition strategies too, because part of the inheritance was that only 1 or 2, it might be the oldest or the second oldest son in the family would inherit the entire estate. The rest of those siblings would be downwardly distributed.
Yeah.
They would go back out into the commons, and then so now they're common people that now are taking those genes into the greater population. Well, the male sexual selection strategy is only eugenic if only the top males are mating.
Oh, that's interesting. So in a way, let's say you have 5 children, the oldest child takes the estate, but so if one of the children are, we say, a bit failures, they maybe choose to be musicians or actors, which are a failing branch back in the day. It's not actually a bad thing strategically, because they're still a part of the aristocracy. They still replace with lower quality women mostly. So even
and then that distributes down the classes.
Yeah.
And we still see this today. I mean, you can trace Rothschild children or any of these elite families from the 40s to now, and the vast majority of the people that are in that family are middle class. They're not this upper elite, right? Yes. So there's a gene distribution going on there. But if you look at mate selection across the entire population, or from the standpoint of the individual male's gene pool, it's dysgenic, because mating across and down is at best maintaining your gene quality. But if you're mating down, then it's diluting your gene quality. And then women are the opposite. So we need to have both of these at play, and then also in check with our other strategies around resource acquisition and conflict and so on. So those parameters form those elastic behaviors and those alignment behaviors that I think allows for us to ride the Red Queen, so to speak.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that there are 2 then big issues with the mating strategy that came, because you said the lower classes during the feudal system was more dysgenic, but during 2 periods, the Industrial Revolution and the French Enlightenment with the equality, that dysgenic behavior became more widespread and even become part of the aristocracy in a way, right? Mm-hmm. Because
and I think that go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm not going to say that mate or male mate selection is inherently dysgenic. It's dysgenic from certain points of view. Over the course of the whole group, if only your top males are mating, then it's eugenic, because it's spreading better genes throughout the entire group. But it seems like when I'm looking at ape I'm looking at a whole bunch of studies, but on ape studies, in the shift in their makeup and then how that's affecting mate selection, it seems like the optimum for humans is somewhere between serial marriage with discrete cheating, and it borders on polyamorous behavior. And I think the reason why is that men, because of sexual dimorphism and males being stronger, the male strategy culturally will end up being dominant. And if we're leaning a little bit more towards the hypergamy of women, it balances it out. So you get reduced conflict within the group. Everybody's getting a chance to mate. It's only the people that have the convenience of cheating discreetly that are propagating their genes out more so than anybody else. Well, what happened in the 1850s forward is we lost all the social norms that were managing that serial marriage, or at that point it was strict monogamy with this discrete cheating. And then so now what we have is a whole bunch of the lower and middles propagating more genes than our uppers.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it dysgenic again, right?
But that is also ending now, with the lower classes making more children, because the culture have changed to only have 1.5 or whatever is the average, like Western average child.
Mm-hmm.
So it's under replacement rate. But what we noticed in Sweden, that the elite families still have 3 to 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the underclass.
Well, and they can afford to.
Yeah.
Because for all the commentary on degeneracy being spread through the culture, the main factor for reduced birth rates in the West, as far as I can see, was financial burdens placed on the middle. So when we broke off the gold standard, went strictly to commodity money, which was debt-driven money, coupled with, and both of these are solutions to inflation through the wage gap. The other one was opening up labor to the global market, because labor was driving prices up. It was making it more and more difficult for investors to make money on anything. I think it was towards the 70s. It was, a good margin of on your investment would be between 1 and 0.8% of your investment. So people were just stopping to invest, and that was because labor, every time inflation came up, labor would raise the prices, which would raise inflation. So to deal with this, they were like, labor's got to be open to a market. It needs to compete. So it can compete with foreign sources of labor or automation. Nobody goes to automation if there's cheap labor available. So it went to outsourcing and immigration. And then coupled with debt created money, and created a situation of rolling debt. Well, the moral middle, they won't have kids if they can't afford it. So they stopped having kids. And then I also think greater urbanization under the same circumstance, and greater baseline stress of urban living, but also just the change in work circumstances from the 70s through the 80s actually creates lower testosterone in men. So all these factors come together, and you get this drop in birth rate. And then people that are pulling mechanisms on things like, what's our tax base going to be in 50 years, start saying we need to solve this problem within our economic zone. So they turn to things like immigration.
Yeah.
Immigration to fill in the declining consumer demographic, to ensure that there's a tax base in the future. That's coupled with corporations saying we need cheaper labor. So it ends up being a perfect storm where we get screwed.
Yeah. But the people coming here as well, they're not going to have a good life. They're just going to become a new lower class. They are the ones who are going to breed a lot. But they won't be able to compete with the already existing hierarchy and the people living here. And over time, the people living here will be seen as a more of an elite class that they can't reach, and because they're not being able to reach it, they will go towards violence, which we're already seeing. So
and then the rhetoric against us already laid on top of that. It's a bad mix.
Exactly.
This ties back into that alignment cohesion thing, though, is that sort of social egalitarianism, every kid is told they can be the president when they grow up, and the difference of social signaling from the upper classes down, so there of upper class signals down into the lower classes, like off the shelf clothing. You could buy off the shelf clothing that fit enough to look like it was tailor-made, where prior to that, tailor-made clothing was a sign of social status. So these social signals kind of equalized, so we lose that clustering effect. So when these immigrants come in and they either don't respond to those clustering effects, or they're not available, the only recourse they have is to look towards the alignment factor, which is the government. So it's the the government programs. So we can turn to the government programs and seek political power for more programs to protect our interests against these old stock citizens, which then causes a breakdown in the system around separation and conflict management. It's ramping up conflicts between these disparate groups, right? So, yeah. So it creates essentially, if we're not managing these things socially, flocking behavior in a social normative space, it creates demand for the state, and then that offsets this competition into the political realm, which is what we've been seeing since the 70s.
Yeah, but the political bureaucrats, they love this because that they gain more power through this eugenics system.
Right.
So that's one reason why it's being upheld. Because if it wasn't for career politicians, I don't think this would be that much of a thing. Because it's two factors really that's making this mass immigration allowing it to be, and that's capitalists wanting to lower wages and make it cheaper for them to produce, and the bureaucrats liking it because it gives them more state power.
Yep. Yeah, and yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, it's a perfect storm of converging common interests that which historically would normally have been held off by, Adam Smith's initial use of the term the invisible hand, which is kinship or loyalty to your own people. That you would prefer to take care of your neighbor who's a dairy farmer when you're a baker, so you'll buy from him, than buying from somebody in another country. We've lost the social normative structures to prevent these sorts of things from happening. And I think the reason why is as you raise in social standing.
Yeah.
So if you look at the IQ distribution and then class, and then look at the frictions that they're responding to. So the social frictions are the clues that we all use to readjust our behavior to align, cluster, or separate, flocking behavior. When you go further up the socioeconomic ladder, there are less frictions between people of similar class compared to their own group. So an oligarch in Russia and an oligarch in the United States will have more in common than a Russian oligarch to a Russian worker or an American oligarch to an American worker. So there's this loss of loyalty and loss of kinship because the social frictions moving down the group in socioeconomic class are greater than moving across the groups. So that's why our elites have this preference towards globalism, right? Because for them, there's less social frictions across the top than there is moving down into their own groups. Where at the very bottom, they see social frictions both across groups, whether that's race or ethnicity, but also up the classes. So they're like hyper paranoid about this threat detection because they've got frictions everywhere.
Yeah, and definitely. I mean, if you go in cheaper, poorer areas, if you dress nice, as you usually are when you're in part of the elite, you get ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
So they rather not be with them and be with the elite who all dresses nice, but it's not a racial thing because they rather be with all types of races as long as they are part of the elite. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and the middle sees sort of a distribution of these frictions that are all manageable. So they lean on civic nationalism, just saying, well, if we can agree on these few things, which anybody of any group or class can, everything will be all right. But that's because they're not experiencing the social frictions at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, again, the reason why the Iranian Revolution was the thing as well. Because they ignore certain issues. They saw the communists as the biggest threat. But they didn't see how the lower classes were changing. How the people, in a way, were changing. And because it was a poorer area, there's more lower classes in a poorer area. So...
yeah, and then it's a tough nut to crack because your lower classes are changing after you've reached the prosperity of essentially culling your underclasses through law. So you have death penalty for a whole ton of things. So that demographic changes. They're changing their responses to certain incentives that run contrary to the very social or institutional principles that uphold your prosperity. So it's like, now what the fuck do we do? So the only, so instead of like hard eugenics, which I don't think is a solution, because I don't think anybody can predict these flocking behaviors.
No.
The soft eugenic approach is to just simply not practice dysgenics. So stop helping people that are not willing to help themselves. Or if you help them, it comes with severe restrictions. Like you're not going to have kids, or if you do have kids, you lose this aid.
So if you talk about different strategies, then I was thinking. So in Hungary now, Viktor Orban, he's made a new system for, I guess, the middle class, lower classes, but at least his population, to incentivize them to have children, and he will pay them to have children. Do you think this is a dysgenic or the other one?
No, I absolutely. I think that we have to address not only the quality of genes, we have to address the IQ distribution. We have to address all of these things. Mm-hmm. And his incentive package is appealing to the middle to keep their birth rates up, which I think is the right. That's the right approach. I think Russia is doing something very similar. Whether it's tax breaks for your children or income splitting on taxes, what you're doing is you're supporting the institution that becomes a bulwark to this underclass.
But won't this just make it so that the lower classes just has more children just to get the money?
Well, but I think that has to be coupled with, if you have 5 children, you have to be paying your own bills. If you can't be paying your own bills, you're not going to get these tax breaks.
Because in Sweden we have the same system, but I think it's more dysgenic here than it's eugenic. Because we're a rather rich country, so the middle class has already enough money to afford their own children. And we give them about 1,000 Swedish crowns, which is, let's say, average father earns 15,000 Swedish crowns after taxes. That's the average. And for every child he has, he gets 1,000 Swedish crown, which is less than 10% of his income. It's good, but it's not much. And after, I think it is 3 or 4 children, you get 2,000 per kid. But a middle class parent, while it's good bonus money in the pocket, it's not really a life changer. He could have survived without it. But for lower classes, usually this is
how they survive.
This is how they survive. They have a lot of children, and again, because of after 3 or 4, they get 2,000 per child instead of 1,000 per child. They're incentivizing them to have multiple children and not take care of the children because it's only in the money. So these people become street rats, as we call them. They are born and they get kicked out in the streets, and you just come home during night to sleep.
Yeah.
And they get the money. So there's more dysgenic. So the question is also, sure, you give them money, but how does the wealth already exist in your nation? For Hungary, because I guess it's a bit poorer, it benefits the middle class, but for us it doesn't benefit the middle class.
No, and I think it's because they're playing it wrong. Instead of it being anybody that has a child gets this child benefit, it's anybody that's not on benefits gets this benefit. So if you're on benefits of some other sort because you're the underclass, you're not going to get this benefit. And then that's how you isolate down the underclass from the middle class. So that's what I mean that soft eugenics is not practicing dysgenics. So a dysgenic approach is to sponsor financially these underclasses. Well, let's not do that. Well, how do you not do that? You say, well, if you are having children, you lose these benefits of us supporting you because you can't support yourself. right?
Yeah.
Other people will say, well, just stop supporting them altogether. But then you're opening yourself up to sort of Brazil, where you're living with a lot of poverty around you, right? So you're damaging the commons by doing that. So it's like, okay, if you can't take care of yourself, we will help you because we don't want to live in a shithole. And I did say something about not swearing, didn't I? So I don't want to live in poverty and illness. But as soon as you do something like have children, or buy a brand new car or whatever, then you lose those benefits. You're done. You're on your own, right? So then that incentivizes them not to be having kids out of wedlock, or not to be having kids that they can't afford to have.
Fair enough. But if they have kids, regardless of they get benefits or not, they're just gonna be stuck in in the state system. Like, I'm thinking many of these children that I was born up with. I was born up next to the lower classes in my society, and definitely in my teenage year, lower classes, because my father wasn't the greatest of men. But so I saw a lot of the poverty, and many of these people, they are just benefiting from the state, and that's their entire life. They get from one handout to another. The state has a system to try to make these people work. So after a year or two of being poor and getting benefits, you go to a place to work, but you don't do anything really. You can just sit there all day and not do anything. But it's more or less you at least you're not out and about in the middle of the day to get the handouts. But
I think that if you're on benefits and are not demonstrating some degree of financial independence, then you should become a ward of the state, and that can be anything at all. Can be mandated to you, whether that's a curfew, or that you have to take care of the commons, so you might pick up garbage in a park or something. You essentially become a ward of the state.
That's exactly what they do.
Not a whole lot different than a productive prisoner. Like, the idea of having people on a system that's supporting their poverty and then trying to give them incentives to work, you have two things working against each other. It's like, all right, if you're going to be on these, we're not going to mess around with incentives. We're going to force you to do it.
Yeah, but the interesting part in here in Sweden, my father was didn't have a job for 7 years, so he became a ward of the state. But the system here, because it kind of, I don't know, he wants you to get stuck in a way. He doesn't make it simple for you. So it's I don't know. It's just like, if you're stuck in that system already, it's really hard to get out of it. So there needs to be a way to get out, but there is no incentive. So what we've done now that's a bit different because of the privatizations. We have something called bemanningsföretag, which is it's a company that you can sign up for, and whenever there's a job available, let's say you can work 2 days in that factory over there cleaning a machine. Then you work for 2 days and then you don't work again until the next program comes along, which is pretty much just slavery, pardon me for saying that, because you don't know if you're going to have enough money in the end of the month to pay the bills. So you're kind of stuck waiting for a job. But that's still another system that we have to try to get out. But like, all of these are dysgenic. And work centers in the UK, it is in the poorer areas. And it's pretty much just to give them enough money to survive at the end of the month. But it's more or less a slavery system. Isn't this a dysgenic system? Because one, you're not going to grow anywhere. You don't have an incentive of clustering. You don't have an incentive to have, a child because you're stuck in the system.
Yeah, but those people respond to incentives differently. If those incentives can be there, but if you're not capable of achieving them, that just creates a whole different set of incentives. So we abolished slavery, except for under one circumstance, which was crime.
Yeah,
it's not that slavery wholehearted was an abject evil and we got rid of it. We said that if you break a crime, you are entering into slavery, which we call imprisonment. That's the initial form of our modern prisons. And it's essentially saying, if you're not going to be a benefit to society, we're going to force you to be a benefit to society. So you're going to be a slave, and you're going to contribute. We're going to force you to contribute to the greater community. Now, we've lost track of that by looking at imprisonment as a set of disincentives for crime, or as a way of rehabilitating people, and lost sight that is not what this was about. This was saying, if you can't be a benefit, or you've done a damage to the greater community, you have to pay it back. You have to be a net positive to be a part of our group. Throw them into jail, and they punch out license plates, or they dig ditches.
Yeah, but when the lower classes here, middle class, do crime, it gets into a prison, but in prison you can still have education. Isn't that a good thing? Because when you come out from prison, you're supposed to have a newer education, like let's say coding or something like that, and you can go out and do that. And
I think that's not a bad idea. I mean, there's going to be marginal cases where that little bit of education is a net boon. I knew a guy that spent 7 years in prison, got his training as a carpenter, and came out as a tradesman and never committed a crime again.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great thing. The military really stands as that process, especially in the United States, that it's a means of what do you call it? Raking the geniuses out of the mud. It's a means of rapid social mobility for those that don't have any other options. So if you're born into abject poverty and you have no other options in that small town you're in, you can join the military.
Yeah.
And when you come out of it, you might be lower middle class instead of underclass, or you might be middle class instead of working class. And then that factors into this Boyds Algorithm thing. That social mobility is what keeps cohesion going. That's what keeps the clustering going. When we're talking about underclasses not having any incentive to work, we're talking about a breakdown of cohesion, because they're not trying to cluster around what we consider to be positive signals anymore. They're like, fuck it, I'll just take the check and watch Netflix all day.
Damn. Soon been an hour. Damn, this has definitely been a tough one. A lot of words.
A tough one?
No, I guess there's a lot to break down.
Well, is there anything else you want to talk about, or?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking here of words to use. So what, like, we talk a lot about soft eugenics, and we talked about, different, when it comes to like having children and incentivizing people of having children. But so what can you say is another soft eugenic we can use for like the middle class? I'm thinking here just another example.
Let's see. So eliminating benefits if people are exhibiting certain behaviors. So if you start dating or you want to get married, and you're awarded the state benefits. So there's that sort of deal. Having ladders of social mobility in place, like military or training in prisons, would be another. I think here's a main one, is readmitting harsh crimes, including the death penalty, for things like demonstrated professional criminality.
Oof.
At any level. So if this is the 7th year in a row that you're getting arrested for car theft, you are a career criminal. You will never be a benefit to society, and throwing you in jail for life means we have to pay for you. Therefore, we're just going to kill you. And I know that goes against a lot of legal principles around the state having the power of death over its citizens, but I think we do need to have that. If people are that degree of antisocial behavior, and they're proving that they will never be a benefit to society, and we have no place to banish them, and we're not going to pay for them, they should be killed. Which was the second component to the downward distribution of genes from the nobility when we were talking about the ramp up of European civilizations, was calling 2 to 3% of the population just through death penalty.
Yeah, I talked with Rick about that many times. how Great Britain pretty much did cullings every now and then with their underclass or their criminals, which was also the point of the penal colonies.
Right.
Yeah, but speaking of that, actually, so if we say that the criminals were bad and inherently net cost, sending them over to Australia and creating,
and then they were beneficial.
Yeah, they were beneficial.
Yeah. Okay, so that comes to the next thing, is that when you have hierarchies that are too steep, so whether your socioeconomic bell curve gets too steep, so it clusters and it's too hard to compete. You can have good quality people that are opting out of the system just because there is no future for them in it.
Yeah.
They'll turn to criminality that way. So this is that notion of social stratification or economic stratification is getting too much of a divide. That, I know it's a socialist rhetoric, but it's very true that if you have one wealth and the rest are down at the bottom, it disincentivizes people from playing the game. So they start making up their own new set of social signals. So this is where we start seeing gang culture coming up, or rebel culture, where people will they'll rework their assessment on what a positive archetype is, based on the opportunities and incentives they have around them. So gang culture comes up because, like, screw the man, because the man's keeping us down. There's a whole swath of, it could be contributing people that get lost into that just because the divide is too great for them to compete. So that means that we have an upper limit. If we're reaching a certain upper limit of wealth and prosperity in the Pareto distribution, it's actually starting to cause damages to the commons. So there is good argument for things like companies that are too big to either be broken down, broken apart, or nationalized or something, so that the wealth and the opportunity can, say, flatten the curve a little bit. The bell curve can't be too steep and can't be too flat. But you have to have an optimum in there.
You just explained something that has been a controversial thing in the past. So a YouTuber back in the day, he got into a lot of shit because he said that upper class blacks commit more crime than upper class whites. And he said that without knowing why, and that became a super controversial topic. But the reason why, as you just said here, because there is the lower classes which are more... Well, when richer black people see their own lower class being so... how should I say it? Chaotic, I guess. I don't know. But with the gang culture and different things, it incentivizes them to stop fighting and kind of joins that gang culture as well. Because they see that there is no point playing the system, because the system is either like rigged or it's bad for their people or anything of that sort. That would explain why more rich blacks are criminal in America, that is, than whites, because they see that their tribe, their people are suffering.
Yeah, and even though they got out of it, what do you do with the rest of them? Yeah. So that's why I see something like Australia as a penal colony developing into a society, or even if you look at the history of wealth, what is it? A history of wealth and power in Canada. I can't remember who wrote that. It was written about 130 years ago or 120 years ago. All of the colonies were really places where people threw their garbage. So if you were nobility or aristocracy and you had a son or daughter that was damaging to your reputation, you'd throw them into the colonies. You'd cut them out of the will, say, here's a little bit of money, go off to that colony, prove yourself, and if you do well, we'll bring you back into the inheritance. So a lot of the nonsense around treaties in Canada be traced back to sort of these lower quality siblings that were thrown into Canada that became somewhat criminal almost in some of their endeavors here. And then the same thing, overpopulation in London, thrown on a boat, sent to Canada. Children of families that were impoverished being taken away from the families and then sent to families in the colonies. So then they get to the colonies and they actually do thrive and survive. And then why is that? Well, it's probably because the competition wasn't suppressing clustering. It wasn't suppressing the cohesion. So you have reduced cohesion, you could cause these other problems. You cause alignment problems. So,
And I mean, thinking you are Canadian. What was the reason for your family moving to Canada?
My family on my father's side were blacksmiths in Suffolk for about 300 years, and my great grandfather, was a little bit more ambitious, and he left Boxford to London. They were in St. Pancras, and he became quite wealthy. He set up a large smithy, and he owned a lot of property, and he paid close attention to the rail system in the colonies, across the colonies. And he sort of predicted that there was a spot in Saskatchewan that was still open for homesteading, that the rail line would go through. It would be a spur. And if whoever could get into that spot and own the land would be another land baron. So he was looking at his next step in his ambitions, that at the time, the sort of the pinnacle of society were these land barons.
Yeah, that's clever.
So he packed up everything and they homesteaded to Saskatchewan, northern Saskatchewan. Well, I guess it's not northern Saskatchewan now, but at the time it would have been. And set up farms. At the time, if you homesteaded, you would get a full section to yourself, and if you had boys, each boy would have a half section, and you could join them. So he had 2 boys, so they had 2 full sections, and they were simply waiting for the rail line to be built to that town, and it kept encountering delays, and then it was eventually canceled.
Oh no.
Yeah. So both of his boys were extremely well educated. They were musicians. They had all gone to school. He had essentially rolled over all of his money from his smithies into educating his boys. So he was trying to get his family to the next economic level, and it didn't pan out.
No, oh, sorry to hear that.
So that's why they had come. And I think at the time, so this would have been 1910 or so. So they would have been in St. Pancras, sort of where overpopulation in London was still pretty bad. And then the same on my mother's side of the family, Icelandic, both the Icelandic family and the Irish family, was to seek opportunities in Canada that weren't available. And they did quite well too. My grandfather on my mother's side with a grade 3 education, had introduced a new design for tugboats, which was essentially putting the engine in a tugboat into the center of the tug, so when it bears down, it doesn't tip. And he became extremely wealthy, but a lower class guy, liked to drink, liked to gamble, spent it all, was killed in a horse race where he gambled with another buddy. I bet my horse is faster than yours. They're both drunk. They get in their horses. He took a apple branch in the chest and it killed him instantly.
Jesus.
So the working class sort of impulsivity was still with him, even though he had gained the wealth. But I think in both of those cases, it was seeking opportunity that was available in the colonies that were no longer available in the UK at the time.
Interesting. All right. It's been an hour, so we're going to start wrapping it up.
Okay.
Anything else you want to say, Bill?
I don't think so. I think it was great to be on and ask you something. What do I want to ask you?
No, I asked for questions, but didn't get any. But there's been some.
I'm gonna give you a question because I think I've gotten the impression that you're a staunch monarchist, and I want to know why.
Why I'm a monarchist?
Yeah.
Hasn't really been my political journey is definitely not as fun as my religious journey. I was thinking here. I don't know how the hell I begin. So all right, as a child.
Let's start here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you an absolutist monarchist, or are you a constitutional monarchist?
Constitutional monarchist.
Okay.
But I do want the king to have more power. So all right, let's start the story as simple. As a child or as a boy here in Sweden, you are put into a public education, and I never had any private education. Everything was in the public system, and quite a lot during the public education, most of my teachers were socialists. And they taught me mostly that socialism is good, capitalism is evil, everything with power is evil, yada, yada, yada. Which is very annoying, but it's what it is. And I was also incentivized that monarchy was stupid because I come from a working class family that doesn't understand the point of a monarch. They only see the material in life. Around age of, I don't know, stopped becoming political around 19, I think. And by that point, I've already seen the benefits of a more freer market, somewhat conservative, whatever. But during the refugee crisis here as well, I start to see how important it is with national borders, like a structure that is set so it doesn't become a concern. But I've never been a nationalist per se. I'm thinking of that because back in the day when we sung the Swedish national anthem in school, I sung the parody version and not the real version. So I never cared about that, and still till this day, one of the reasons why I didn't want to go to the military is because I kind of don't want to die for the nation. But I saw, the more I went into the politics, and I would say it was with the first political discord I was in, I saw one thing that's very important, and that is to have a strong core in your system that kind of, in a way, is totalitarian. Just the core itself. It doesn't have to be much. Like a king is, in a way, a totalitarian system, or can be, if it chooses to, which is the state of exception. And the reason for that is to stop any sort of spread to happen. So the person who, the autocrat during the time of that server, handled like 9,000 people, and he knew how to handle them. He knew how to not make Antifa become such a big problem. He knew how to avoid terrorism and all of that. And once the system broke down, which it did when he left, everybody tried to reach that totalitarian core again, the autocratic core, and failed over and over and over again because they were never built to manage it.
So that Discord server then was acting
as
in the same structure as like a mini monarchy then.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But and then the monarch left, but there was no one to replace it, and everybody who replaced it failed. But there I learned things like what you described with culture, that regardless of like who owned the server, regardless if it was very active, changed the entire culture of the server. The first
alignment.
Exactly. The first guy who I learned this, like the first monarch, I should say, was a reactionary Catholic. He made the entire server rather Catholic. He wasn't very active, like he wasn't very pushy in the beginning, but definitely made it more right wing, more reactionary, more Catholic. What he is, even though he wasn't super active all the time. And once he left and a new person came in, it mimicked that behavior. And the funny thing is, the one I actually took over afterwards was an even more brutish Catholic who banned all women, banned all anime profiles, just banned everything. He was if you take the English, he would be the Puritan during the English Civil War. But they don't last very long. So he collapsed. I took over for 2 days, then I collapsed. Because it was a mutiny. And I learned there that if you haven't established power since before, if you just take power through force, there will be a mutiny by the people who will take you over and replace you with another person that they like. Like the French Revolution.
Clustering over alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. It's interesting. It's what you've been talking about, what I've been seeing as well. After that,
and that's why I see monarchies as that alignment factor. They're not celebrities. They're not cohesion. They're not providing social cohesion. They're providing and demanding alignment. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what I'm for as well. That's what I've seen the monarchs are good for. It's creating a sort of culture and alignment, and also to make sure that the server doesn't collapse. Because in the end of the day, even though the owner might not be active, it's still his responsibility of not crashing the server. And after that, I can't tell publicly what happened much more after that. But a few other people took over, and their culture became the main, but their culture became bad. It started with the fascists taking over, and the fascists turned into postmodernist. Yes, a postmodernist fascist, I know. And from there on, it just went downhill, and more people left. But I was stuck there for a little while. But here I saw the Mad King. But
Okay.
But there was no way of actually removing the Mad King. There was attempts of mutinies, but all of them failed, because the Mad King had a very small council, like moderators, that no one could touch him. It was not until the Mad King himself collapsed under his own psyche that the reign of the Mad King ended. It was a lot of stress for him. He actually came to me crying as well one time. It was a lot of stress for him. But the Mad King stopped, and then a submissive king took over, and this king was the absolute pushover.
Right.
And actually, when
no alignment.
And actually, when the Mad King came back, he came back a few months afterwards. The submissive king allowed the Mad King to have influence again, but not be king, but just be some sort of a council member. And from that point, the server went to a very, very dark, very dark structure that
Really?
I had to leave. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's because they became not good people.
Right.
And because of the submissive king, the bad cultures could rise because there was no one stopping it.
Right.
So
and that's a breakdown of alignment.
Yeah.
Social structures and morality are alignment factors. Right.
And after that, me and Joe started the prop channel.
Okay.
And then yeah.
Constraints on the monarch, like where you see the bad king rise, that's where the constitutional side comes in.
Exactly.
You can have the monarch, but you have to have the constraints on power.
Yep. The Mad King, regardless if there's a constitution, will obviously create some concern because the world is not perfect.
Right.
But at least it will limit him.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
But I more or less I saw what you've seen here as well. I saw how good it is to have a structure, both a constitution and a king, to be the judge of last resort, and just to make sure the structure doesn't completely break. It's the king's responsibility to do that, and then it's something for people to look at and to mimic. But it's sadly still done that in Sweden. We have an aristocracy class and upper class that's actually mimicking the king. So whenever the king does something, they joke about it. But I'm from the south. We don't have that much influence of the king here. But in Stockholm, for example, it's always jokes about the king.
Okay.
So it's shown there, and I think it's a good thing technically. But I do wish he did more. But he did a very good thing very recently, our king. Where he actually used the state of exception to do some changes in Swedish academia.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, he did it, and everybody was so happy. So yeah, the ones who did the Nobel Prize, it's Swedish academia and a few others, but it's mostly run in Sweden. It's a structure that is kind of not under the state, but an institution in and of itself on the side. So the parliament can't go in and say, "Hey, do this." The speaker can't go in, "Hey, do this." No. They are equal. They are self-reliant, and they created a system where the females who came up there, they were touched quite often by the leading people of that institution. So and that became public. That there were many women who has been touched by many of the men. And it was kind of like, it just, no changes could happen. The ladies didn't have enough power. They couldn't. It wasn't rape. It was just molestation. So they couldn't just point out that because they're kind of so powerful, these men. So nothing happened until the king came on and said, all right, you people, you're gone. Bye.
Right.
He just kicked them out.
That's exactly.
And everybody loved him for that.
Yeah. We were talking with somebody on Discord the other night where we're like, how does a judge of last resort work? And we were talking about in the areas where it's not calculable by law, the monarch can then step in.
Yes.
Because then the costs are later. And then I was thinking that there's also a breakdown where if you can't calculate it on the individual level, like that one transaction, then law can't handle it because there's no crime to commit. It's also where the cumulative effect is only noticeable at large scale. Then you can have preemptive constraints on certain behaviors that maybe a regulatory body, which is preemptive constraint, could fall under the monarch, where the monarch is responsible for these regulations intergenerationally as a more robust role than just a veto power. That could be a different leg of the government that's segregated from law and segregated from legislation, which is just management and so on. So I was playing with that idea when we had that conversation because I was always very soft on monarch, very, very soft. It was like the governor general, the supreme magistrate. It might be deciding to go to war or something, but there might be a more robust role there, which is exactly what it seems like everybody's thirsting for. That we need a correction to alignment. And there's nobody there to do it. And then they're falling on cohesion. So let's be totalitarian. Let's be fascists and get this solved, right? When that's not the solution, because that's not where the problem is.
Yeah, but that's a solution for the underclasses because they don't have that. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely not the healthiest or the best way of doing it. But it's used, when the lower class is angry, they use it. But the issue is that I see when it comes to fascism is the people looking at fascism, they misunderstand it.
Yeah, I actually don't have really any issue with fascism with the exception that it might cause stagnation.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm leery about how it's able to adapt to social changes or adapt to any external influence on that landscape. But I think it would grind to a halt. That's been my only issue with fascism. I had another question in there for you. Oh, okay. So the other thing that we were talking about at one point was about religion.
Yep.
And how religion has been sort of the explicit expression of a group survival strategy.
Yep.
How do you see that playing out, or like today, but also over like the last 300 years, where there's been an increase in secularism in these other institutions?
Let's see how. So when it comes to secularism, many attempts have been tried. The best thing one can do is just allow it over time to become a part of how people act overall. That's the best culture. So you don't go in, you don't take away the priest and remove the priests immediately because that won't solve it, which many Marxists or Jacobins did. But I'm thinking here of the different occasions. So if we take, I usually joke about religion's role in society using Robespierre. So Robespierre hated obviously the Catholic Church. He didn't want anything to do with that. He wanted no religion, and he wanted rationalism to be, the rational man to become the part of it. But what did Robespierre do? Well, obviously he got not a cult personality, but he got completely he became the Mad King. And he created a new cult, I don't remember the cult's name, where they worshipped very powerful intellectual men, pretty much just as the Catholic Church or a pagan would do when it comes to the rituals. So in the end of the day, he didn't replace anything, he just replaced the theology. The ritual is still there. And it's the reason that happened is because they weren't ready for the secular change immediately, because it takes multiple generations to change what rituals are needed. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the theology, it's about the rituals. What is it giving to the people? And we can see this even back when Paul started talking. Paul did this is 70 after Christ. Talk with the Christians, the pagans, and what to do with them. And more or less, the things he's done is more replace Christian tradition. Replace pagan tradition to the then Jesus sect that was back then, and that's what the church have done ever since Paul. Just replace pagan rituals into a Christian framework, use their theology instead of the pagans, but keep the same ritual, keep the same reasoning. And the Eastern Church did the same thing. We usually say, Richard say, and I do agree with it somewhat, that the saints are just what's it called again?
The pantheon.
Pantheon, yes, it's just multiple gods, but it's just in saints instead. But it's not that it's gods, because the theology is not the important part. It's just what the people need. This is what they understand, so this is what you give them. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the secular in the last 300 years, socialists were wrong, the materialists were wrong, because they only saw the theology as the bad, so they just removed the entirety of it together with the ritual. And so, now we're fine. Nah, you end up in a vacuum. Mm. So you need to learn how to replace the theology, but keep the rituals.
Right. Yeah. When I was on with Truth, In Truth Victorious?
Yep.
We were talking a little bit about that, and I was saying that I didn't see religion as a hard problem because
it ain't.
One side of it is around that social cohesion. It's the rituals and the signaling to say I am a part of this group, or I'm willing to be a part of this group, and also reward for those signals. And then the other side is personal meaning.
Yes.
Forming a relationship with your own life through a deity or through a personification. That if those two things could be separated, even if it's just for the individual, then all of this conflict between secularism and religion goes away.
Yeah. But many people haven't seen this. I mean, the new atheists that I was a part of when I was like 16, they just see organized religion bad, theology bad. We got it, boys, we're fixed now. It's like, no, you didn't do anything. You just said they're bad, don't believe in God, which, I mean, I don't believe in God anymore, that's fine. That part is fine. But you didn't replace it with anything. You just tear it apart and then now we're fine. No, that makes people feel bad, and this is why many, like we see more depression between in atheism and new atheism. It's because you haven't replaced the rituals. I'm not asking them to be like Robespierre, but I'm just asking them to understand the psychological reasoning behind it, the tribal reasoning behind it, and then just see, all right, maybe singing a song before you eat could be a good thing because that makes people happy. I don't know, but for example, something like that. Swap the rituals to be more secular and seem like everyday rituals. Yes, swap the religious, theological rituals with more everyday rituals. Because we do everyday rituals all the time, but it's just that is the secular ones.
Yeah.
Just make them part of that. Again, maybe sing more song, maybe dance more. I don't know, something.
Well, I can give you an example. Since the shutdown happened, we're in week 6 or coming up on week 7.
Yeah.
By about the third week, everybody in Toronto, they go out onto their balconies and they smash pots and go woo at 7:30.
Yeah, that's ritual.
For 1 minute. Yeah, it's to acknowledge the first responders. Well, now we've got people playing "O Canada" with their trumpet off the 20th floor of an apartment building, and it's every night, and it grows every night. Like you can hear the entire city going through this. It's emotional, and it's running with the pack, right? It's being part of this greater body, right?
Exactly.
And it's completely secular. I had another question in there.
But this is again what they have to understand and to replace it with, because the ritual's not the bad part. You know,
Yeah.
funerals is one of the most important rituals we have. It's an acknowledgement of someone has passed. If you don't have that acknowledgement, you actually feel turmoil in your body. So it has a good
I found the
psychological.
same thing with fatherhood.
Oh,
The ritual around fatherhood is greatly lost.
yeah.
So I found when my daughter was born, and then there was problems with my daughter had to be in ICU, and then there was problems with my wife. So I was in there all day, every day for weeks. There was no acknowledgement of the father anymore. And getting into like the fifth or sixth day, I was like, now I understand why guys walk out on their family, because
Ah,
I feel completely irrelevant to this. It's only the mother, it's only the child. And every time nurses come in, they won't call me father or dad. It's birthing partner or my name until I
ah,
finally ask. And that ritual of not being accepted
yeah.
in this event was disenfranchising. And then that contrasted to as soon as we were out of the hospital and I'd be walking down the street pushing my daughter in a stroller, and all the fathers coming up, hey buddy, congratulations. And it was like being welcomed into this group, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
there was this
awesome.
other ritual that then brought me back into fatherhood. The importance of rituals like that, the transitions in life,
Yes,
where's your place, what's your belonging, what does it mean, you're not alone,
yes,
all of that.
yes. All of those rituals are important, but again, we don't talk about it and we kind of forget it. Luckily,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to rituals, you get it regardless if you know about it or not. But yes, you said that's absolutely something that one has to do. That's usually the point of baptism. Did you baptize her?
Yeah, with my mother-in-law's very religious, so yes, she was baptized.
Usually, baptism is also when the parents become part of it. And I think this has to do more with that during birthing back in the day that the father was not that involved because he
Mm-hmm.
was either working or doing something else. But it's during the baptism where the father really could become a part of the child's life.
Does that correspond to that notion that the mother has the child for the first 8 or 10 years, and then the father eventually takes over and continues? There's rituals around this transition from being your mother's child to your father's child.
Well, I don't know about those rituals,
Okay.
but there I don't know if there's any ritual. There's no ritual when it comes to that. That's just I guess a more natural part. But I know about like again baptism was that acknowledgement. But as you said, it's probably very good to have even a ritual before that, an understanding of it being your child. Because what
Yeah.
rituals do, and again, point of the burial ritual, is to acknowledge that there has been a transition. So whenever you finish school, whenever you start a new school, you should always have a ritual telling yourself, telling your subconscious, now I'm part of a new system.
One thing's ended, the next thing begins.
Yes, that's usually the biggest part of rituals. There are many reasons why we do rituals. That's the big one, transitioning. And if you don't have the
Marking
transition,
your history.
yes. And if you
Yeah.
don't have that, your subconscious become cuckoo. I can give you an example. You gave the child as a good example. I can give another example actually. My grandfather, on my father's side, we didn't know that he was dead until 3 weeks after he died, and the funeral had already become a thing. We saw it on a newspaper that he died. That became a traumatic thing for both me and my father, but especially my father. But I don't know how he felt about it all the time because I'm not him. But I know how I felt about it. I didn't acknowledge it because we never got the confirmation that he died. You know, we got it through newspaper and someone told us afterwards, oh, he's dead. The funeral's already been. It's like, okay, where's our mourning period?
Right.
Why were we not allowed to cry?
Mm.
And I remember I had multiple dreams about him. I remember I had a dream about him where I was in the store and I saw him on the other side of the aisle. And I confronted him, went up to him, screamed at him, and saying, you should be dead. You shouldn't be here. Everybody told me you're dead. Why are you alive? Why are you here? That was my subconscious telling me. Kind of my subconscious.
Why are you
going,
still here?
Yeah, going through that entire endeavor that he's actually is dead. I needed to understand he was dead. And I did actually the ritual a few years afterwards by going to his grave. And by the way, we didn't know where his grave was. No one told us.
Oh my God.
Yeah. We have a horrible family. But I found out where he was, so I went to it myself and I sat there for a mile mourning him. That was my Passover, going past from one stage to another to understand that he's fully dead.
It takes wisdom to identify that and do it.
Yeah, I did a few things to get past. I also talked to his wife, my grandmother, to also understand all the reasoning behind why it became this way. I can
That's
when it comes
an
to
important factor, right?
Definitely.
Like family secrets. It's like you find out about a family secret, and it's like everything in your world has to be reframed.
Yeah. I became a black sheep in my family when I was born because of one reason, and all of this I wanted to know why. Sadly, it didn't really get an answer. But so when I was born, my grandfather, on my father's side, gave my mother and father an ultimatum, saying that they want me Monday to Friday for the next 3 years, and my mother and father is only allowed to see me on Saturdays and Sundays. And that was so they could go and work and do other things and don't have the care of the child. Both my mother and father said, no, absolutely not. You're not taking my child away from me. So I became a black sheep because I didn't allow that. Or they didn't allow that. And the worst part is when I later confronted her, 2 years ago now, and I asked her, why the hell do you guys do this? I don't remember. So I never got a good conclusion for that question. Because that disagreement there made it so I never had a family unit more than my mother, father, and sister. I didn't have any grandparents. I didn't have any cousins, really. From time to time, but not that much as normal people. But I never got an answer for why, and that's sad.
It's tough. I know there were some secrets that my grandfather had that happened long before my father was even born, that my father didn't find out about until after my grandfather died. And how you have to reframe all of it changes the context in a lot of the relationships where you have with that person. It takes a long time to reframe according to the new information.
Yeah.
And then I had similar things that there was a lot of tension, a lot of violence from my mother when I was growing up, and not understanding why. And then not until I was, I think, 28 or 29, actually getting an explanation around mental illness and around the history we never had growing up. So you grow up in one context with one set of assumptions about why your life is the way it is. And then in a 20-minute conversation, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Like completely different. I went from going, my father's this terrible guy because he could solve these problems, to understanding now what the problem really was, to going, my God, he's a hero.
Yeah.
In like over the course of a beer and a half.
Yeah.
It's like, so we try to not hide anything from my daughter because of that. Even, where people would say, well, maybe they're too young. It's like, no,
that's good. That's
it's
healthy.
better that she knows. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I remember myself as a kid. I never was told anything. And one of the most refreshing parts of growing up was I was allowed to sit at the grown-ups table talking about all the problems grown-ups have, relationship problems, bills, all of that. That's great. I love that, because as a child I was not allowed to talk about that. I was not allowed to listen to it. I even remember my father, I was 18 or 19, he broke his arm, his hand, and I was helping him. Me and another person was helping him to write the doctor's agreements on, like, oh, how's your health, how all of those type of things. So doctors had to know, and so when we started helping him, he said to me, "Oh, you can go and play somewhere else, or you go and play on my phone or something." It's like, no, I want to be here. This is grown-up stuff. I love it.
Yeah.
So it's like that transition was amazing. But then you also start figuring more things out, and you understand how everything happened in the past. And as you said, it's one of the most refreshing things about my grandfather was more or less a sentence that my grandmother said. It was because my father's always told me that my grandfather's like not like bad in some way. Like, he loves him, but he's like bad in some way. And she said to me, if he was that bad, I would have left them ages ago.
Right.
Because if he was as bad, I wouldn't be with him. Mm-hmm. Because you're allowed to divorce in Sweden. So, but she loved him. Like, right. Yes, but just that sentence, the first sentence I said, that's really refreshing. That's the type of things you want to hear. Because then you understand why people go through hardships.
And the other thing too is, like, these are our, they're our relatives. They're a part of who you are. It's
yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you're speaking poorly about your grandparent or your mother or your father, there's a part of you that carries that around.
Yes.
Carries that insult around, right? So I think it's better to understand their faults and then try to improve it rather than criticize and demonizing.
Which I did.
Our relatives. Yeah, I think we had the same thing. I did the same thing with my father through the earlier part of my life, and then my mother's like, no, it's the problem, and then going, well, wait a minute. These are just people trying to navigate the world no differently than I am. I just had no clue because I didn't have the information.
Yeah.
So make sure the kids have the information.
I fully agree. Because they are more grown-ups than you think they are.
Yeah.
And to hide it doesn't benefit them.
I think kids look to their adults like it's a whole other world.
Yeah.
If you expose them a little bit to say, well, this is my concern, or I'm worried about this, or this is what we're trying to figure out, and admit your flaws in it too. So I'm too much for this or whatever. It gives them more data to construct those orienting mechanisms for when they're an adult.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Fascinating conversation.
We have to do this more often.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, definitely. We will.
So you're my monarch on Discord now.
Yeah.
I don't have to bend a knee, do I?
No, but if you take the structure we have now, it's a dualarchy we have now in the server. I'm not actually the owner. Joe is the owner, but I have more or less the same power that Joe has, except I can't delete the server. He's the one who can do that.
But it's something to be said that having that structure in place is important to maintain the quality of the commons.
Yeah. That's
it's
our main
noticeable.
Job. Yeah, that's our main job. If people are bad, we ban them. And because we don't want to be a bigger server, we have more power. Like, I don't know how the stress it has to be when you have 9,000 people you have to look after. That's usually why you have admins and moderators. But admin and moderators are given power by the king, the autocrat. So he has to pick them. And who he picks matters a lot. And if you pick wrong, the server can collapse.
Yeah. I was trying to do something similar, like, sorry, I'm jumping 2 steps ahead. When you said managing a Discord of 9,000 people, I'm like, that's the wrong way to approach it. You need to watch who's clustering around who. So who becomes the celebrities or the key opinion leaders. Yeah. And then break it off and then have them manage that so that you're constantly bifurcating. And then all you have to do is say, when you guys are managing your servers, just make sure you're not deviating from these limits, right?
Yeah.
And that was something that I was trying to do with the sheepdog stuff, is not trying to build community, which is clustering, but build people who would cause community.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And what I was overlooking is that I didn't need to do that. All I needed to do was set the alignment,
Mm-hmm.
and let the clustering emerge on its own.
Mm-hmm. It will happen on its own. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah. And you told me that, I think, on our second conversation, when you, Joe, and I were on the second time that we'd ever spoken, you said, no, you have to have top down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I've always been for top down, but you don't have to. You don't do much. Mm-hmm. Like the thing with bosses and kings and all the top down structure, the king doesn't actually do much when it comes to physical labor, but he does a lot when it comes to responsibility.
Yeah.
Because in the end of the day, if everything collapses, it's his fault. He needs to make sure it doesn't collapse. And that's a 24 hours job.
Yeah, and I saw that with wolf packs, with cooperative social animals that have a division of labor. The leader is not a clustering factor. It's alignment. They're looking for prey. They're looking for mobility.
Yep.
So all they're doing is working on alignment and following. And it's the second in charge that deals with the cohesion. So you can have a CEO that has no idea what's going on in his business simply because he hired people to take care of that, so that he doesn't have to think about it and he looks forward. And then as a manager, you have that cohesion factor where you're having to manage people. And
I actually have a perfect example when it comes to Discord server who did exactly that. The YouTube channel Iconoclast, it's an UK right-wing server. He made a Discord server. He made like 5 people admins, and then he left. He had never been active on it, but it created a very. It's gone now, by the way. But when it was active, the community was amazing. Like I was even there, and I spoke to many of them. Many of them are friends today. But he didn't have to do anything really. He just created the structure and left, and then the admins took over, and the clustering from there created their own community. The thing that happened after a while, it's people actually completely ignore Iconoclast. He was not important anymore for the structure of the server or the reason that people were there, because they were there for the cluster. They were there for each other, which was an interesting one. It's not the best way of doing it. You need to be visible. As a monarch, you
just described exactly what happened to the monarchy in Canada, is that they just became irrelevant. So just get rid of them. They're not participating.
Yeah, and you get rid of them. But you shouldn't do that. You still have a responsibility to be visible. And he has to come in there a few times and just say hi. Doesn't have to do much, but a few times go in and say hi. It helps a lot. I know that every time Kurt comes in, he's more visible, obviously. Like the people are there for him, but he doesn't have any power. But when he comes in for like a few hours, the community for like the next 3 weeks are more active.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, because they found their direction, they found a goal, they found inspiration to move forward. It's not just chatting with your people anymore. Yeah, that's fantastic.
And usually when the server is as most docile, it's when nothing is happening. No drama, no communication with the higher ups, nothing. Mm-hmm. Obviously, me and Joe tries to do something, but again, we also get bored.
Yeah.
But again, Kurt coming in from time to time is really good. You being there has made it more active.
Good.
It's like
good.
It's just people want to, cohesion.
Yeah.
And now we have the community that's active. We all know each other. We all talk.
Yeah, I mean, and the quality of people. I mean, you guys are far more well read than I am. Everybody's cognitively competent. So we might have pee-pee poo-poo humor, but it's still capable of a good conversation. But it's still capable of having a conversation, and to improve, right?
Yeah.
So right from day one, because I lurked on here for the longest time. I think when I first got onto Discord, this was ages ago. I think it was after Kurt and Josh had their blowout, and then I think you started this Discord after.
No, long before.
Wasn't it?
Long before.
Was it before?
Long before
okay.
Josh, yeah.
And I would lurk because I'm like, holy shit, these guys are not only having citations, they're having in-depth discussions about it. I think it was because I kept hitting, I don't know if it was the library or the commons or something. And it was like, this is a really impressive crew, and it intimidated me, so I stayed on Facebook.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Facebook crew, for me, it's nothing I like. But I think it has more to do with my face being visible than anything else. The point of Discord is also that you have a character. You're not fully visible.
I see.
Which...
I'm fully visible. I'm visible right now.
Yeah. I mean, again, I show my face during lectures. It's not like that, but I prefer the little bit of I can't say that word, Jesus. But being anonymous, a tiny bit at least. Because it makes me more comfortable speaking.
I think there's other advantages to that too. I think that, we all have personas. Like we have our working persona, or how we are with our girlfriend or something. Our person. If you're exploring one particular area and you can have a persona around it, you can almost isolate away distraction. So if you leave for a couple months and come back, you can pick up where you are and keep developing. Yeah. There's some advantages to that. The disadvantages is that the rest of the people around you only see this tiny sliver, and their sort of profiling around you can quite often be very inaccurate.
It can be, yes. Usually what I show them. What they know is what I tell them. But it's just...
And as long as everybody knows that's the contract, then it's fine, right?
Yeah, it is the contract.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has a big problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a rather honest person, but obviously things they don't know and things I will never tell them. And that's fine. I mean,
everybody's doing the same.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's doing the same. And if you want to get to know me more, you come to the meetups and have a beer with me.
Yeah.
Just what I say. But yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I've always kept in mind throughout all of this, is that you have to keep things in perspective. The people that you're interacting with online is, you can know and care about them like you would a close friend, but it does not mean that you know who they are. And then the same thing is the accolades and the rewards that you're getting from it are not as substantial as they feel. It's like accomplishments on social media is akin to accomplishments in a video game. Right. So you kind of got to keep it in perspective. And Andy Curzon, I think we were interacting for a while, and I think it's because he was doing sort of his own mental experiment on the feedback loop between followers and leaders and how that affects the leaders. I think it relates back to what Jordan Peterson said about Hitler responding to the crowd, and then that's how the message evolved. The one thing that I was really leery about is creating a persona and then having to be enslaved by it. So I put effort into showing, like, if I'm going to be a dick about something, be a dick about it. Don't worry about that reputation. Or, almost having a more rounded out or filled out persona, because I didn't want to have to protect it as a property. It's like, if I'm a jerk, I'm a jerk. So I can be an idiot, I can be a jerk, I can have bad humor, but I can also say a few good things. And I think that dynamic between a leader and follower is really important. It keeps the follower base focused on what the value is, because it is so hard or so easy to mistake value in an online endeavor.
That's true. And yeah, I mean, but the point, I don't know, when it comes to the value of things, many people don't want it to be high value. They just want to, it's an escapist fantasy for many people as well to do this. So to be, to be able to shit, or to tell Shannon she's a Lebanese person, you do that because you're anonymous, and you don't want it to have more value than just being a shitpost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I've been doing that for the last couple of weeks because I just gave up all that work, and it's like now I don't have to bite my tongue. I can say and do the things I normally wouldn't, and have some fun with it without it being meaningful.
Yeah.
So it's a relief.
And for many, again, because it is for many an escapist point to create a new persona, to get away from real life problems and just shitpost with people on Discord and on the internet.
Stress relief. Stress relief.
Definitely. But it's sad in some way because escapism always has its issues. But in moderation, obviously, it's good. But I know a lot of young men come to the Discord just to talk about ideas that they maybe do. Is it good or bad? And they're doing it through persona, so it doesn't feel like a personal attack. If I tell them, that sounds dumb. Because it's persona I'm talking to. So immediately...
That's the one thing that I really appreciate about you is that I know I'll get an honest review from you. You'll be like, that was not a good idea. And there's no gray area or there's no transition to walk through before you get that. I get that from you. So I know I can say something or what do you think of this, that it'll be honest off the bat.
Yeah. That's why I call you boomer alcoholic.
I'm a little too young to be a boomer, though.
Oh yeah. Well.
Yeah. I'm the Xer. I'm the Xer that we were because the boomers had all the jobs, we couldn't rise, and then when they were supposed to die off and us get the jobs, they gave them to the millennials. So the only thing boomers do is eat popcorn, swallow black pills, and laugh at everybody else. Like we're pretty cynical and we're not very useful because our numbers are too low. But yeah.
Gosh. Do you have faith in the new generation?
Generation Z, I have a lot of faith in. I know some older millennials, and but I think the ones that I know, because it's construction and working class, I think their makeup might not be representative of the generation. That are very solid guys. I see a resurgence of sort of the values or the gumption that were around in my father's generation with those older millennials. But I think the advantage of Z coming up is they have the cynicism of the Xers because they're in the shadow of the millennials, but they'll act where the Xers didn't. And there's a depth and a clarity and a cuttingness to their cognition that I really like. It's like, I want to know what's going to happen in the next 25 years.
We'll see.
Like this is going to be really interesting. Are they going to correct this? Because I think they will. And I think there's a split enough that there's going to be some ironing out that has to go on. And it isn't going to be superficial nonsense like from the boomers through till today. There's going to be depth. Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm pretty impressed by most of the Zs that I know.
But I think all of the hardship we're going through now, even the pandemic, is definitely hardening them to do changes in the future.
Yeah, I think they're going to be a very savvy generation that isn't going to buy into a lot of the crap that the rest of us have or have had to put up with. Yeah,
it's needed.
It is. And it's that regular cycles through the generations and through civilizations, we see it over and over again.
Well, I will be, I don't know if it counts as a millennial. I'm born 96, so I think it counts millennial, but I look forward to rising up next to them. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like they're bad millennials. I mean, 90% of the people I'm dealing with online are millennials, right? Mm. It's just the greater academia, I think, has had more of an impact on the millennial generation, and that's the responsibility of the boomers that introduced that. Goddamn. All right. Well, I think we'll end it here. It's been 1 hour 53 minutes. Excellent. All right. There's been no questions, just conversations on the chat. So. Oh, I haven't even seen. Where is the chat? I had to give you the link of the. Hold on, let me give you the link. Don't worry about it. Right. We'll wrap it up and then I'll go back and read it after. You do that. Okay. Oops. Excellent start there. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Bill. It was really fun.
Thank you.
We have to do this more often. And
That's anytime.
Anytime. All right. Goodbye, everybody.